Since I've been here, I've watched Moscow police cars come in and out of this neighborhood, where officials found 4 people dead. Moscow police responded to King Road for a call about an unconscious person Sunday afternoon.
Police still have this house here near University of Idaho taped off. This right here is where officers found 4 bodies yesterday.
Four college students, 1 house, 13 minutes of pure terror. When police finally breached the door at 1122 King Road on that November afternoon, seasoned investigators stopped cold. Blood seeped through the walls. The carnage inside defied comprehension, and somewhere in that house of horrors, a single piece of overlooked evidence would unravel everything. This is File Chronicle. What you're about to hear is the story of the Idaho student murders, a case where a criminology PhD student thought he could commit the perfect crime. He was wrong, but not before 4 beautiful lives were stolen in the dead of night. This is the King Road Massacre. November 12, 2022, a Saturday night in Moscow, Idaho. The kind of night that happens 1,000 times on college campuses across America. Friends making plans, parties calling, the future stretching out like an open road. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, best friends since childhood, inseparable as sisters, headed downtown to the Corner Club bar around 10 that evening. They were celebrating life, celebrating friendship, celebrating everything they thought they had ahead of them. At the same time, Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin were at a fraternity party on campus. Young love in full bloom. Ethan was a triplet who loved his siblings, loved boats, loved working on a tulip farm. Xana was the kind of person who could turn any bad situation into something beautiful. They were 2 happy people living their best lives. 3 miles across the state line in Pullman, Washington, another person was awake that night. Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at Washington State University, studying how criminals think, how they plan, how they kill, and tonight he was ready to put theory into practice. Back in Moscow, the night unfolded exactly as it should have. Kaylee and Maddie left the Corner Club at 1:30 a.m., heading to a local food truck for late-night mac and cheese. Security footage would later capture them laughing, grabbing their order, completely unaware of what was circling in the darkness. By 1:56 a.m., they were home, a 3-story house on King Road they shared with 4 other roommates. Xana and Ethan arrived minutes later. By 2 a.m., all 6 housemates were inside, settling down for the night. What none of them knew was that a white Hyundai Elantra had already made 3 passes by their house, circling, watching, waiting like a vulture over prey. At 4 a.m., Xana's DoorDash order arrived. She was still awake, probably sharing food with Ethan in her 2nd-floor bedroom. Down the hall, their roommate Dylan Mortensen was in her room. 1 floor below, Bethany Funk was asleep in the basement. And 1 floor above, on the 3rd floor, Kaylee and Maddie had climbed into the same bed they'd shared since they were little girls. A habit that brought them comfort, a bond that would seal their fate together. At 4:04 a.m., the white Elantra returned for the 4th time. This time, it didn't leave. Bryan Kohberger slipped through the sliding glass door on the main level. He was dressed entirely in black, face covered by a mask, carrying a 7-inch Ka bar military knife, the kind designed not just to kill, but to destroy. He moved with purpose up to the 3rd floor. His target was there, Maddie Mogen, the girl from the restaurant where he'd allegedly been watching, planning, fantasizing. But Maddie wasn't alone. The 2 best friends were sleeping side by side when the monster came for them. Maddie was on the outside edge of the bed, She was killed first, stabbed with such savagery that her face became unrecognizable. Kaylee, trapped against the wall, awakened to a nightmare. She fought. Evidence would later show she fought desperately. But there was nowhere to run, no way to escape. Over 30 times the knife came down on Kaylee. Over 30 times. The commotion, the struggle, the sounds of dying, they carried through the house. Dylan Mortensen, one floor below, heard crying, heard voices. She opened her door once, saw nothing, heard more sounds, opened it again, and this is where the story becomes almost unbearably tragic. As Kohberger descended from the 3rd floor, Xana emerged from her room. Maybe she heard something. Maybe she was checking on the DoorDash delivery, but she came face to face with pure evil. "It's okay. I'm going to help you," a male voice said, words that would haunt investigators. But there would be no help, only violence. Ethan, hearing the commotion, rushed to defend the woman he loved. He was mortally wounded almost immediately. But Xana, beautiful, fierce Xana, fought back with everything she had. Over 50 stab wounds covered her body, many on her arms, hands, and face. She fought like a warrior, refusing to surrender, making him work for every horrible second. But a 19-year-old girl with bare hands was no match for a knife-wielding killer. At 4:17 a.m., a security camera picked up muffled sounds, voices, a whimper, then a loud thud. The sound of Xana's body hitting the floor. Dylan opened her door one final time, and there he was, a tall figure in black, bushy eyebrows visible above the mask. He walked right past her, so close she could see those eyebrows, so close she could have been victim number 5, and headed toward the back door. Frozen in terror, Dylan locked herself in her room. At 4:20 a.m., the white Elantra sped away from King Road at high speed, nearly losing control as it fled the scene of unimaginable carnage. Inside that house, 4 young people lay dead. 2 roommates remained alive, traumatized beyond measure, and for 8 agonizing hours, no one called 911. When police finally arrived at noon on November 13th, they stepped into one of the bloodiest crime scenes in American history. Blood had seeped through the exterior walls of the house. 4 bodies on 2 different floors. A level of violence that suggested personal rage, intimate fury. But there was something the killer had overlooked in his frenzy. Next to Maddie's body, partially hidden, lay a leather knife sheath bearing a Marine Corps insignia. And on the snap button of that sheath was a microscopic trace of DNA. For 47 days, the nation watched and waited while Moscow became a community gripped by terror. Was the killer still among them? Would he strike again? Tips poured in, over 19,000 emails, thousands of phone calls, but no arrests. Behind the scenes, investigators were building an ironclad case. They had the DNA from the knife sheath. They had surveillance footage showing that white Elantra making multiple passes by the house. They had Dylan's description of the bushy-browed man in black. And they had cell phone tower data showing that one particular phone had pinged near the King Road house 12 times in the months before the murders, always late at night. On the 13th visit, that phone went dark at 2:47 a.m. It came back online at 4:48 a.m., traveling from Moscow back toward Pullman, Washington. When investigators used genetic genealogy to trace the DNA on the knife sheath, they got a name that made everything click into place: Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student living just 10 miles away. A man who drove a white Hyundai Elantra. A man whose phone had been circling that house for months like a predator stalking prey. On December 30th, 2022, a SWAT team surrounded his parents' home in Pennsylvania. At 1:30 in the morning, they found Kohberger awake in the kitchen, wearing latex gloves, methodically separating his trash into Ziploc bags. Even in his parents' home, he was trying to hide evidence. When they arrested him, Kohberger's first words weren't denial. They weren't shock. He simply asked, "Anyone else arrested?" The narcissism was stunning. The cold calculation chilling. For 2.5 years, Bryan Kohberger maintained his innocence. His defense team filed motion after motion, claiming police had rushed to judgment, that the DNA evidence was flawed, that there was no connection between him and the victims. They were right about one thing. Investigators never found a direct connection. No social media links, no texts, no proof they'd ever met. The motive remained a haunting mystery. But the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the car, the cell phone data, the eyewitness description matching his distinctive bushy eyebrows, the fact that he'd studied criminology, written papers about how criminals select victims, how they approach them, how they escape. He'd planned the perfect crime, and he'd failed spectacularly. On July 2, 2025, in a stunning reversal, Bryan Kohberger entered guilty pleas to all charges. 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of burglary. Standing before the judge, he admitted what he denied for 933 days. Guilty, 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 guilty. The families wept, some in relief that there would finally be justice, others in rage that he'd escaped the death penalty through his plea deal. All of them devastated that he'd stolen so much while offering nothing in return. No explanation, no remorse, no answers to the question that will haunt them forever. Why? At Kohberger's sentencing, Kaylee's sister stood before him and spoke the words we're all thinking. "I won't offer you tears. I won't offer you trembling. Disappointments like you thrive on pain, on fear, and on the illusion of power. Instead, I will call you what you are: sociopath, psychopath, murderer." She asked him questions he'll never answer. Why November 13th? Where's the murder weapon? What were Kaylee's last words? Did he really think he was smarter than everyone else? And then the most devastating question of all: if you were really smart, do you think you'd be here right now? Bryan Kohberger is now serving 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole in Idaho's maximum security prison. 23 hours a day in a cell, 1 hour of freedom, a shower every other day. That's his life now. That's all he has left. Meanwhile, 4 families will never see their children graduate, marry, have babies, grow old. Kaylee's car sits in her parents' driveway, untouched. Xana's laugh is gone forever. Maddie's infectious smile exists only in photographs. Ethan's tulip farm blooms without him. The house on King Road has been demolished. Where evil once lived, there's only empty ground now. Sometimes the monsters are exactly who they appear to be. Awkward graduate students who study death because they're consumed by it, who circle houses in the middle of the night because fantasies can no longer satisfy them, who believe their education makes them clever enough to kill without consequence. Bryan Kohberger studied criminology for years, earning degrees, writing papers, analyzing the minds of killers. But in the end, he became exactly what he studied, and he wasn't even good at it. He left his DNA at the scene. He was captured on multiple cameras. His phone betrayed his every movement. He created a mountain of digital evidence that led investigators straight to his door. The only thing he succeeded at was destroying 4 innocent lives and traumatizing everyone who loved them. This has been File Chronicle. I'm your host, reminding you that evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and fire. Sometimes it wears a mask and bushy eyebrows. Sometimes it drives a white Elantra through quiet college towns. And sometimes, despite studying how to commit the perfect crime, it leaves behind a single knife sheath that brings the whole facade crashing down. Justice was served, but 4 beautiful lights were extinguished forever. Remember their names: Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They deserved so much more than to become chapters in someone else's twisted story.